It is springtime in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we are on a little walkabout this morning showing off some of the beautiful plants that are blooming here in the Raleigh area right here at the beginning of April. Everything's kind of overlapping this year. We've had some things really stretch out blooming the last few years because we just haven't had a lot of cold really late. And this year, the cold has kind of held everything off, and now we have this unbelievable spring flower, you know, all out at the same time, all the trees and the early flowering shrubs at the same time. So this is one of the coolest azaleas right here. This is the purple spider azalea is the common name for this one. And it's just an unbelievable azalea. I think this was just one plant that's now suckered. Azaleas will do this in time. They'll, you know, as you mulch over them, you'll mulch over a stem and it'll root in and it'll just kind of spread. There's not so much about root suckering as they are about branches being laid down, leaves falling in there, and then they're able to root out like this. But look at this thing coming into full flower. What a unique flower for an azalea. I imagine at least one more azalea will show up in this video because we're peak azalea, evergreen azalea season right now. But I thought we'd really start off with one that's just so incredibly unique and should be a staple in gardens, but it's kind of on the rare side, really. Weirdly, all of the azaleas are kind of blooming at the same time. This is a Formosa azalea, which is a pretty common one, very vigorous growing large azalea. These make great screening plants, really, and I think in an upcoming screening plant video, I'll definitely have Formosa azaleas in it. But these have been pruned off the top really late in the season, and that's costed a lot of flowers. These bloom on old wood, and so you know, you're still getting some flowers here and there where they didn't manage to, you know, have to hack them off. They're still pretty, and the flowers, you know, on these are quite a bit bigger than on other azaleas. So there's a lot of these Southern Indica varieties, but this is Formosa. There's a white version of this. There's multicolored ones. But these, you typically bloom a week or two later in general than a lot of the other smaller growing dwarf Japanese varieties. I think this one is Sherwood Red. I sold this and grew this one for years, and it has a slightly orangey red. But it's a pretty plant. Again, they had pruned this one off, but I guess they got it at just the right time where it still had enough time to put some flowers right out on the edge. They're not quite in full flower yet, but they'll be fully flowered here in the next week. And we're at NC State, so they put the red and white azaleas together. Again, this one's kind of an orangey red. There's probably, there's actually an azalea called Wolfpack Red that probably should be the one that they're gonna put up here. May not have been out when these were planted originally. And then there's a lot of white varieties out there. Some people don't like white azaleas because they will go through, they'll go from that white to a brown color for a little while, and some people don't like it all that much. But boy, when they're in flower, I mean, there's nothing like that. There's several over the years. Delaware Valley White was always the most used white one, and then there's one called Snow. This one has a little bit of a double flower on it, so I don't know. I actually don't know which one this is because there are literally hundreds of thousands probably of named evergreen azaleas like this. But when they color up, you know, this is really one of those things. Of course, we have spring and fall blooming azaleas now, you know, and a lot of folks have moved to those. But some of these old azaleas like this, when they fully cover up for this week and a half that they do this in the spring, this is really the you know, welcome to spring. Right outside of Ricks Hall on NC State's campus, they have 4 Chinese fringe trees across the front. We also have a couple native species of fringe tree as well. The Chinese fringe trees tend to have a, you know, really wide habit to them. So if you plant one of these, you need to have some space. We actually walked past one in the neighborhood on the way here, and they had put it right next to the sidewalk and right next to their driveway. And that the ultimate shape of the tree kind of matters a bit, you know, in terms of where you're going to plant it. We have a Tokyo Tower Chinese fringe tree in our garden at the house. It's very upright and fastigiate, so you can have one of these and just have it a slightly different shape. But they've planted these in the perfect spot. The bed is a very deep bed back here. They won't get a whole lot taller than this. I mean, really, you don't see them much taller than this. They just tend to get wider from here and get really more and more interesting. The bark's interesting, the flowers are interesting. Great ornamental plants. And again, I'm not discounting our native, but when I see one of these, you know, in their full, you know, when they really get big and wide, they're just absolute showstoppers. We did a video last year about all things cut into meatballs, and a lot of those were on the campus here. And so you've seen those azaleas where they've cut them, but at the wrong time of year. These Indian hawthorns, although they grow in a bit of a meatball shape on their own, they've done some pruning on these in the past too, and they're a little bit thin on the flowering, but they're in the process of opening right now. This one's a pale pink one. I don't know what variety this is. There are white, kind of pale pink, and then kind of darker pink, low growing, mounding Indian hawthorns. There's been some work. These, you'll see some spotting on the leaves here. These are in the rose family. It's not atypical to have, you know, spots on the leaves like that. If that will focus on it, maybe it will. But again, leaf spot like you see on things in the rose family. So there are some breeding here going on, trying to, and it has, that snowbank variety that we have in our garden is very resistant to leaf spot. When these color up though, they're great. The dwarf ones tend not to have any fragrance, but if you're following the channel, we'll do an update on our Rosalinda, which is a tree, basically a tree version of this with larger flowers, larger leaves, and it's incredibly fragrant when it comes into flower. But these are in the process of coming out. This is a great plant. If you're in the South and you have a spot out by the road that dogs walk past frequently, or you have a dog that targets certain places when they come out of the house to pee, this is a salt-tolerant, leafy evergreen plant, so it's really good for that. It'll bloom now, really kind of great compact habit on these dwarf ones, and then you'll get a kind of a blackish droop on it later in the season, which I understand is edible. I don't know anything about that, but Indian hawthorns have kind of come and gone in the landscape over in the 40 years I've been in this business, because we've seen a couple of, you know, a really bad winter can hurt these. You know, something below zero can really hurt them here in zone 8A or zone 7B, and then we'll see, you know, we've seen varieties that have declined in time from leaf spot, but again, they're coming back like crazy again because there's so many new good ones, and there's such a good plant in an urban space where, again, there's lots of dog traffic. Here's a really interesting space on campus where they're using Loropetalum as hedging plants. Unfortunately, you know, they do bloom on old growth, and so they're probably a little hair late on pruning these purple ones. So they don't have quite as many flowers as they would, but they're purple year round, and then they're using this green one, which is probably emerald snow, you know, and they're keeping them about the same size. So with or without flowers, it's really kind of an interesting hedging operation there. And then around to the left, it looks like some autumn lilac, which is one of the Encore Azaleas starting to come into flower. And I can see they're completely budded up, so they'll be solid white, but they're a little bit behind the others. But I just thought it was interesting. They've used Loropetalum for hedges, and again, they look great. The emerald snows were not pruned, hacked on quite as bad toward the end, and so they have a lot more flowers on them than the purple ones do. On campus, they use a lot of styrax. Styrax is a good, it's a good ornamental tree that you can, if you plant 10 of them, they can all kind of look the same. You know, not a lot of trees lend themselves to that, but they're well-behaved trees, you know, on a college campus like this. The bell tower is actually going off. I don't know what time it is. It's 8 in the morning as the bell tower's going off. So I don't know how long that actually goes. They put real bells in here last year, which is kind of interesting. This was the bell tower. Come around and show it, Steph. The bell tower didn't have actual bells in it for a long time, and so it was under construction, and this is the place where all the students come this time of year and take photos for their graduation photos. And so we're over here early because all day long, this is Sunday, all day long, folks will be over here taking their cap and gown photos at the bell tower. But real bells, and we got to actually hear them going off. This deodar cedar behind me, I think is worth pointing out because look at the size of it. This is about the time the tops die in them. For some reason, all the tops always die in them, and then they start to really spread out and get wider. But I don't know if it's cold related or what it happens to them, but this one's now got 3 liters in it. And you can see the size of it. It's really scaled to a college campus and not necessarily scaled to our landscapes. But there's a bunch of them up in the neighborhood, and when you have one, this one at this point is probably 30, 40 feet across, it'll eat the entire garden up. But why I actually stopped here, can you see this well stuff, this oak back here? This is a willow oak back here behind me, and I always think about what is the most oak, right? I mean, we have live oaks down in the deep south that get all the interesting limbs and they keep their leaves in the winter time. And certainly I think people in the deep south would say that live oaks are the most oak of all oaks. But for me, it's always been willow oaks. They have smaller leaves, so some people don't use them because they're a little harder to rake and clean up in the fall. But every willow oak, this is how they look as they mature and age. They're just majestic giants in the landscape. And they're, of course, again, it's scaled to a college campus, right? It's kind of the perfect plant for a large open space, and it matches the size and scale of the bell tower that's sitting next to it. I don't know how old that one is. I would probably guess in the 80 to 100 years, something like that. And it's just absolute perfection to me. And they all grow like this. I had one in the front garden at the old house. If you go back and look at those videos, it was about 25 years old, and it was maybe 30 feet tall as I was leaving, 25 feet tall, something like that. But eventually, they usually have a single leader that branches pretty evenly, and then eventually they develop multiple leaders as well up in the top. And they just, to me, again, you can comment down below, what is the most oak of all the oaks? But to me, when I see one of these willow oaks this size, I go, well, that's the mightiest of all the trees right there. This is Camellias virginicus, which is our native fringe tree to the area. We can tell, I can ID these by the pointy leaf as they're coming out in the spring. The bark is a little different too, so it's kind of the bark on the Chinese fringe tree, Camellias retusus, is a little deeper. This one tends to have a little bit smoother of a bark on it. But the main indicator for me when they're coming out is the leaf shape on Camellias virginicus is slightly more pointed, whereas the retusus, the Chinese fringe tree, is a little more roundish, football, kind of a little bit more of a football shape with the ends kind of smoothed off. So that's where we can kind of tell the difference. This one has not fully colored up yet. You know, like a lot of these spring flowering white things, the flowers kind of start off a greenish hue to it. So the Chinese fringe trees are a little bit ahead of this. There's actually a Chinese fringe tree over here. The growth habits also ends up being a little different. They've put that Chinese fringe tree in a kind of a difficult spot because they really want to get wide, and they're kind of taking the edges off of it to keep, because there's a path that walks around it. These tend to be a little more upright and a little smaller overall in our ornamental landscapes. But I love this tree. And again, as it's coming out in the spring is when you can really identify them, because there's so many Chinese fringe trees and native fringe trees throughout our area. This is an Otto Luyken laurel. This one's pretty common in our area here in Raleigh, North Carolina. These are hardy in like zones 6 to 8B, maybe down into 9A, but fairly narrow range where this plant grows. The one thing that allows me to kind of identify Otto Luyken versus some other laurels is the leaves kind of point kind of straight up, which is interesting. It's an interesting characteristic that this one has. As you can see up here at the top, all the newish leaves are just pointing straight up. The flowers are arranged on a raceme. They're probably 3 to 6 inches long, depending on how vigorous the plant is. They'll come into full flower right now in the spring. The fragrance is a little off, but not terrible. And then they'll throw a few flowers during the summer as well. You'll see some additional flowering on them. They tend to have a bit of this kind of flattish growth habit overall. And I think on tags, you'll see that this one gets like 3 to 4 feet by maybe 4 to 6 feet in width. And that's probably true over about 10 years if you were starting from a 3-gallon, something like that. But we have seen this plant much taller than this. This plant can probably creep up to 8, even 10 feet if it's allowed to over a long period of time. If you were gonna do any pruning on it, any flat topping on it, you would do it after the spring flowering for sure. That would be the only good time of year to really do that. It's an interesting plant with a great growth habit. Part shade in our area. If you're in zone 6, you can put it out in more sun. Deep shade, they tend to be a little bit thin. So I'm gonna put part shade or sun on the screen, but here, by the time you get down to zone 8, definitely a little more protected. A little park shade area is probably best. This is Phlox subulata, otherwise known as kind of creeping phlox. Lots of different colors this one comes in. This is probably the most common, this kind of lavender purple color, but there's all kinds of combos of pinks and whites and lavender colors that you'll see in these creeping phlox. There's some hybridization going on in some as well, where some interspecies hybrids are out there in the world that I can't necessarily tell the difference on, but most of it's Phlox subulata, native to Appalachian mountains, and fantastic plant for pollinators in the early, more middle spring up in Appalachia where they're actually native to, but here in Raleigh, they just come into full bloom in March and early April typically. Pretty long bloomed, and then it's an evergreen ground cover, so has kind of a little lacy, thin foliage on it afterwards. And if they're kept in pretty good shape and reasonably moist during the season, then the foliage stays looking great all summer long. If they're on like a dry slope or something like that doesn't get any maintenance, they can look a little rough during the summer months, but they come into this full flower this time of year. Great early season pollinator plant. And then of course there are other native phlox as well, taller growing woodland phlox and upright phlox that come into flower later in the season. Here's a sun ground cover that we have to be a little careful with where we plant here in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is lavender. And the Spanish lavenders do not like wet feet. They're Mediterranean plants, and our clay-based soil can sometimes be problematic. So this is a row of them that's planted in a very dry area along a sidewalk with a slope. Has an extra guarantee, and they're coming into full flower here at the beginning of April, and they'll be fully colored up in the next few weeks. And of course, everybody loves lavender for its culinary purposes, and then the pollinators absolutely go crazy for it as it comes into absolute full flower. The variety Phenomenal is a good one. If you're in the Southeast, it tends to be a little bit more tolerant of our humidity and our seasonally kind of wet conditions that we may have here. Out on the West Coast, it's kind of funny how, it's a pretty easy plant, and people will take their weed eaters and whack it down, in the late winter and let it come back out from that. We just have to play a super delicate balance with where we can grow lavender, but it's definitely worth a try. Here's our great native dogwood in its full glory. This is Cornus florida. Of course, we'll see these as mostly white flowers, but then you'll see pink varieties and red varieties as well. Most of those are going to be grafted. So they were found as basically a pink flowering branch on one, and then it was grafted to an understock of regular white Cornus florida. That's how you end up with pinks and reds out in the world. These have not had the best run. They're all over the city of Raleigh and all throughout, one of people's favorite understory trees. But they've had some tough run of luck. We had a cold winter though this winter, or I won't call it a cold winter. We had just a normal winter finally. And they've really come out and look a lot better. I think that one of the issues may be that they're just not getting enough cold stratification during the winter time, because with a little more cold stratification, they really look great this year. My favorite variation of this, I'm going to throw over to now. There's a Mexican version of this over at the Ralston. Let's take a look at that. This is one of my absolute favorite trees at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. This is the Mexican version of our native dogwood. This one, Mexican flowering dogwood is what a lot of people call this one, but it is Cornus florida. It's just a subspecies of it. You get these fused bracts where the flowers don't appear to open completely up, and it creates these little umbrella looking flowers. And I just absolutely love this plant. It's pretty rare in cultivation. It'll grow anywhere really Cornus florida will grow, maybe not quite as cold hardy overall, but I've seen this plant out in San Francisco and seen it here on the East Coast, but again, it's fairly rare. I know that if you see like seeds for sale for this tree, it's probably a scam. I know that kind of thing goes on with this plant, but this, again, fairly rare. But when we see this thing in full bloom here at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum, it's unbelievable. This one's probably 20 to 25 feet high at this point. Again, I kind of go out of my way every year to come see this thing in full flower, because it's one of the more special plants here at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. Here's a real traditional southern planting of G.G. Gerbing azalea and Formosa azalea. So you'll see the main ones you'll see are George Tabor, which kind of has a combo flower, and then Formosa, and then the white one here is Gigi Gerbing. Big, large flowers on these, larger leaves typically. These are a little stressed because they're growing under a maple, of course, that's probably fairly greedy next to the road. But they basically plant them together, and they've been allowed to intermix with one another. So they're taking azaleas that get the same size. These are very vigorous growers. You can see Formosa azalea is 12 feet tall if we looked around the city long enough today. But I always love these purple and white combos where people mix Gigi Gerbing and Formosa together. You know, this is basically a low screening plant, and we have a neighbor in the neighborhood that has Formosa azaleas like this as for a screen, and he keeps them kind of narrow. So, but you just have to be careful how late in the season you prune them. You don't want to prune them after, let's say July, the 4th of July, something like that, for them to fully form flowers and be flower to flower. We're a little early on these two, but I wanted to show this because I love this. You know, when you see this vivid white versus that kind of purplish Formosa, it always is a standout. There are hundreds and hundreds of named varieties of Camellia japonicas and other camellias as well, but arguably Jack's may be the best overall Camellia japonica. And this is another example of things overlapping this year. We've seen, you know, where the trees have kind of waited a little longer to flush out and do their thing, and azaleas more lined up with one another, and all the flowering trees blooming at the same time. The cold also held off some of these Camellia japonicas, and they're blooming much later into the season than they typically do. So normally by now they're pretty much wrapped up, and this one is just coming into what is full bloom right now. Jack's may have the best overall shape and form plus flower. Like all parts of it are great. This one's in where they do need part shade conditions. This one's in a lot of shade. It's been here a long time. It's kind of limbed itself up over this wall, but from the wall up, you can see how full that plant is and how perfect each individual flower is on Jack's. And so I did a video with Bree on a channel that we had together temporarily, and we went through we had people vote on what they thought were the best camellias, and we just matched them up each week. And of course, form, flower, and floriferousness, you know, the amount of flowers that are on this plant make this one of the better camellias. Certainly, if not the best, one of the best for sure. I'd be remiss filming a walk around video that included azaleas, did not include the variety Coral Bells. This is always been one of the most popular varieties of spring flowering azaleas, and you can see why. The wild thing about this plant is you can have what amounts to not a great looking plant overall, like a thin, been in too much shade, hardly any leaves on this thing, okay? And it'll come out and bloom like this. It's just always been such an interesting variety that way. It'd even be that way in the containers. We'd have ones in the containers that didn't look great, and then they'd bloom in the spring and cover completely up in flowers, like this one has. But it's got more flowers than leaves on it right now. And it's, again, this salmon pink color stands out from a mile away. And when you combine it with whites, there's several places in the neighborhood where they have the white one near this or beside it, and it's just such a giant pop of color. Normally in our neighborhood, we're watching invasive plants try to kill each other, but this is actually a native vine, a bignonia, growing on top of an alyssium. So this is two native plants that have gone to war a bit against one another. This bignonia can be aggressive. Once it flowers, it'll flower right now. We have one at the house. We'll show in an upcoming video. May have been sprayed, not by us. It's not in the best of shape, but hopefully it's alive. But this one, this one's growing over this beautiful alyssium, which has those red kind of ancient flowers, ancient lineage these alyssium are, and then the bignonia growing on top of it, which is quite showy. Get these bignonias sometimes in slightly different colors, where some of them will be a little more yellow in them, some are a little more orangey, that kind of thing. But it's rare that we get to see two native plants not playing nice with one another. Normally it's all the invasives everywhere. One of our favorite plants to come see in bloom every spring is this Calycanthus. This is a white version, and it is extremely fragrant in flower. One thing that's happened with Calycanthus over the years is, with our native Calycanthus, which have these incredibly fragrant flowers, these strange alien-like flowers, people have taken cuttings off ones that didn't have fragrance or something, and there's a lot of them out in the world that don't have fragrance. And of course, then there's been some interspecies hybrids between Asian varieties, and they don't have any fragrance. And so we're left with smelling lots of flowers on Calycanthus and not coming away with much scent. But this one never lets us down. It has this applesauce scent to it. We're filming this in the middle of the day, and it doesn't have a lot of fragrances. Usually in the evening or early in the morning, this thing, and you can smell it. We cut through here, this school with the dogs all the time, and you can smell it before you round the corner. You know this Calycanthus is in flower. But this is, again, this is one of those that every spring we know about this time, early April, that it's gonna come into flower. This is, Calycanthus are definitely one, like a lot of our natives, it becomes a colony. This one's in the process of colonizing this space. So you can choose to cut those pieces back if you want to and keep it as kind of a single piece. There's a crepe myrtle coming up right through the middle of this one. And then good fall color, great in flower, smell it before you buy it. That would be my suggestion with our native Calycanthus, and make sure it's actually got some fragrance before you purchase it. But there you go. There's some things as we've wandered around the neighborhood today and over by campus that are in flower, and we've got a lot of things just overlapping all at once. There's actually a Ladybank's rose back there that's in full flower. I think you can see in the background with just tens of thousands of flowers on it. So let us know down in the description or down in the comment section what's blooming heavily in your garden or in your area right now. Thanks for watching.